Welcome to our deep dive today, where we're going to be tackling a philosopher who might not be a household name, but trust me, his ideas are as relevant today as they were back in the 19th century. Ludwig Feuerbach, you might not know him as well as, say, a Marx or a Nietzsche,
Right.
but those guys were heavily influenced by his work,
Yeah.
particularly his take on religion and human nature.
Yeah.
And our guide for this journey is going to be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Great source.
No worry, we'll distill all the key points for you.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Marx and Nietzsche because Feuerbach really occupies this fascinating intellectual space.
Okay.
He bridges the gap between German idealism with figures like Hegel and then the move towards materialism that you see in later thinkers.
So he's a bit of a philosophical bridge builder then.
Yeah, you could say that.
That's cool. Okay, so where do we even begin with Feuerbach?
Right.
What's the starting point for understanding this guy?
Well, I think his intellectual journey is a good place to start. You see, Feuerbach started as a devoted Hegelian, completely on board with this idea of the absolute spirit driving history forward.
Okay, now for those of us who haven't spent hours poring over Hegel, can you remind us what that absolute spirit business is all about?
Of course. So in a nutshell, Hegel saw history as this grand unfolding of reason culminating in a kind of self-aware cosmic consciousness.
Okay.
Think of it like the universe gradually becoming aware of itself through human history.
Whoa. Yeah, it's pretty out there.
It is.
So Feuerbach was into that initially.
He was, but there's a twist.
Okay.
He eventually breaks away from this whole Hegelian system
Okay.
and starts calling for a return to nature.
Okay.
He starts arguing that philosophy needs to ground itself in the concrete reality of human existence, not these abstract concepts.
It's like enough with all this head in the clouds thinking, let's get back to basics.
Yeah, something like that.
What prompted this shift? Was he just tired of all the abstract jargon?
Well, there's a powerful quote that really captures his feelings. He says he urges philosophy to come down from its divine and self-sufficient blissfulness in thought and open its eyes to human misery. So he felt that philosophy had lost sight of human suffering and the need to improve people's actual lives.
Wow, that's a serious call to action.
It is.
This shift towards materialism.
Yeah.
Is that what really sets the stage for his famous critique of religion?
Absolutely. And this is where Feuerbach really starts to make waves.
Okay.
He famously claims that theology is anthropology. Now, that might sound a bit cryptic at first,
Yeah.
but what he's getting at is that our ideas about God aren't about some objective divine reality. They're really projections of our own human needs, desires, and values.
So instead of God creating man in his own image,
Uh-huh.
we're kind of creating God in our image.
Exactly. A great example is the Christian concept of a loving God.
Okay.
Feuerbach argues that it's not some external divine force that gives rise to this idea.
Right.
It's our deeply human longing for love, compassion, and security. We create a God who embodies the qualities we crave in ourselves and the world.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like when we think about God, we're not looking up at the heavens. We're kind of just looking in a mirror and seeing an idealized version of ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But is that really such a bad thing?
Well, here's where Feuerbach's critique gets a little sharp.
Okay.
He argues that by projecting our best qualities onto a separate divine being, we end up alienating ourselves from our own potential.
Okay.
We become dependent on a God for things that we could achieve ourselves.
So it's like we're giving away our own power, our own capacity for good by putting it outside of ourselves.
Precisely. Now, it's important to remember the historical context here.
Okay.
Feuerbach is writing The Essence of Christianity in 1841. Just a year after a very conservative king, Friedrich Wilhelm V, takes over in Prussia.
Okay.
And there's this huge debate raging about whether you can reconcile Hegelian philosophy with traditional Christian beliefs.
So he's diving headfirst into a philosophical and political firestorm.
He is, and he's taking aim at both sides.
Okay.
He criticizes those who saw Hegelianism as a perfect fit with Christianity.
Right.
And he blasts those clinging to the idea of a personal God. He sees both positions as forms of intellectual and spiritual alienation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned his critique of Hegel earlier. What exactly did Feuerbach have against Hegel's concept of absolute spirit?
Well, remember how Hegel saw this absolute spirit as the culmination of history?
Yes.
Feuerbach argued that while it's an interesting concept, it ultimately prevents humanity from reaching its full potential.
Right.
He actually calls Hegel's philosophy the last magnificent attempt to restore Christianity, just dressed up in fancy philosophical language.
So instead of finding God in the heavens, we're finding God in this abstract philosophical system,
Yeah.
but it's still alienation because it ignores the importance of our concrete human experience, right?
Exactly. Feuerbach wants to ground philosophy in the real tangible world. The world we experience through our senses, he believes our senses, not abstract thought, are the foundation of human consciousness.
That's pretty revolutionary for his time, going against centuries of philosophical tradition that prized reason and intellect above all else.
Absolutely. He even says, I am a real sensuous being, and indeed the body in its totality is my ego, my essence itself.
Wow.
That's a bold statement that really challenges the traditional separation of mind and body that dominated Western thought for so long.
So for Feuerbach, it's not just our minds that matter, but our whole embodied experience, our physical selves.
Exactly.
This makes me think about his concept of the Glücklichkeitsstribe,
Yes.
which I think is often translated as the drive to happiness, right?
You got
And
it.
it's not just about seeking pleasure, though, right? It's something deeper.
It's about the fulfillment of our essential human needs and desires.
Okay.
And Feuerbach argues that this desire for happiness is so powerful it shapes our understanding of everything, even the divine. We create gods who can give us what we crave most. Immortality, protection, a sense that our needs are met.
So are you saying the gods we create are basically just wish fulfillment figures?
In a way, yes. They embody our deepest longings for a world where our needs are met and we are free from suffering and death.
Okay.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
Feuerbach argues that by projecting our desire for happiness onto God, we end up alienating ourselves from our own power to achieve happiness in this world.
It's like we're giving up responsibility for creating a just and compassionate society because we've put all our eggs in the God basket, so to speak.
Right, but what's fascinating is that Feuerbach's thinking about religion actually evolved over time.
Oh.
In his later work, he moves away from the idea of religion as primarily a projection of the human species.
Wait, hold on. He actually changes his mind about some of his core ideas.
He does.
That's not something you see every day in philosophy.
You're telling me. But that's what makes Feuerbach so interesting.
Right.
He's constantly questioning and refining his ideas. In his later work, he focuses more on the individual psychological needs that give rise to religious belief,
Okay.
particularly the anxieties that come from being aware of our own mortality.
So instead of this grand projection of the whole human species, he's zeroing in on those very personal, very human fears and anxieties that lead us to seek comfort in something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And this shift leads him down some pretty interesting paths.
Such as?
In his book Theogony, for example, he turns to ancient Greek poetry and the Hebrew scriptures to trace the development of religious ideas.
Poetry.
I know, right?
That seems like a pretty unusual approach for a philosopher, don't you think?
It is, but Feuerbach sees poetry as this incredible window into the human psyche.
Okay.
He thinks that by studying how gods are depicted in myths and stories,
Okay.
we can uncover the deep-seated psychological needs that those gods are fulfilling. For example, he looks at how gods often appear in response to human desires and pleas, especially when people feel powerless.
That reminds me of how even today people often turn to prayer or rituals during times of crisis or uncertainty.
Right.
It's like they're reaching out to a higher power when they feel like they have nowhere else to turn.
Yes, and Feuerbach's point is that this impulse is deeply rooted in our human nature.
Okay.
We have this inherent desire to transcend our limitations,
Right.
to find meaning in a world that often feels chaotic. And religion is one way we try to do that.
So interesting how he connects this desire for transcendence to concepts like freedom and morality.
Absolutely. In his later writings, Feuerbach tries to understand these concepts in terms of our natural embodied existence.
Okay.
He develops this intriguing naturalistic account of conscience,
Okay.
seeing it as the voice of the sensuous, thou, the other person whose well-being is intertwined with our own.
So conscience isn't some divine spark inside us, but something rooted in our relationships with others.
Right.
Our awareness of their needs and feelings.
Precisely. For Feuerbach, morality isn't about following abstract rules. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness with other human beings and acting in ways that benefit both them and ourselves.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But before we move on, I think it's important to pause and ask, what does all of this mean for us today? For our understanding of ourselves and the world we live in?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think Feuerbach's work challenges us to examine our own beliefs and values.
Okay.
Are we truly living in a way that aligns with our human nature? Or are we holding on to outdated ideas and institutions that are holding us back?
That's something to think about for sure. It's like he's calling for us to take responsibility for our own happiness,
Hmm.
for creating a world where everyone can thrive.
Yeah.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive so far.
It certainly has, and there's so much more to explore.
There is?
Feuerbach's ideas about freedom and ethics in particular offer some really compelling insights.
Well, I'm definitely ready to dive deeper into those ideas.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the philosophy of Ludwig Feuerbach, where we're exploring how his ideas about religion, human nature, and even freedom can still challenge us today.
I'm struck by how Feuerbach took this really unique approach to understanding religion, especially his analysis of those ancient Greek poems and the Hebrew scriptures.
Yeah.
It's not your typical philosophy textbook stuff.
You're right, it's not, but that's what makes him so fascinating. He looked at myths and stories not just as entertainment, but as profound expressions of human hopes, fears, and, those deep-seated longings we were talking about earlier.
He saw them as windows into the human psyche,
Huh.
right? And through those windows, he was able to make this really compelling argument about how our desire for happiness shapes our very understanding of the divine.
Exactly, and he specifically focused on how the gods in these stories often show up precisely when humans need them most, facing danger, illness, or even just the prospect of death.
So it's like those gods become these powerful symbols of comfort and protection, especially when people feel most vulnerable.
Yes, and Feuerbach connects this impulse to believe in a higher power, to our awareness of our own limitations, our sense of finitude and our own mortality. We crave something that can transcend those limitations, something that can offer hope and meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
This really resonates with me.
Right.
Even today, people who might not consider themselves traditionally religious still look for those sources of meaning and comfort, whether it's through nature art or human connection.
Absolutely. And Feuerbach, I think, would see those impulses as deeply human, just different expressions of that same fundamental drive to find meaning and happiness in a world that doesn't always provide easy answers.
And remember how he emphasized the role of the senses in shaping our understanding of the world. It's not just about abstract reasoning, it's about our direct embodied experiences.
That's where his concept of the Glückseligkeitstrieb, that drive to happiness, really comes into play. It's the driving force behind our actions, our beliefs, and even our understanding of the divine.
Because that drive isn't just about seeking pleasure, right? It's about something much more profound, the fulfillment of those essential needs and desires that make us human.
Exactly. And Feuerbach argued that this drive is so fundamental that it shapes how we see everything, including, those big concepts like God. Think about it. We often imagine God possessing those qualities we desire most: omnipotence, omniscience, perfect love. We project our longings onto this, powerful being.
So in a sense, the gods we create are almost like idealized reflections of ourselves, embodying those qualities we strive for, but maybe can't fully achieve in our limited human lives.
That's a great way to put it. But here's where Feuerbach's critique takes a really interesting turn. He argues that by placing our hopes for happiness in a God outside of ourselves, we actually end up alienating ourselves from our own power to achieve happiness here in the world.
It's like we're giving away our agency, our responsibility to create a just and compassionate world by putting all our faith in a divine being who may or may not even exist.
Now, to be fair to Feuerbach, he wasn't trying to simply dismiss religion as a delusion or something foolish. He recognized it as a very natural human response to the anxieties of existence. Remember, he saw us as finite beings living in a world that can often feel chaotic and out of our control.
So for him, religion was a way of coping with those existential fears, offering a sense of comfort and purpose.
Exactly. He even acknowledged that religion can have positive aspects, promoting social cohesion and giving people a sense of belonging and meaning.
But he was also deeply critical of how religion could be used to justify oppression, inequality, and even violence. He saw the traditional god of theism as a projection of human power and domination, not of genuine love and compassion. He was really urging people to think critically about religion's role in their lives and in society. Was it truly serving those deepest human needs, or was it being used as a tool for control and exploitation? These questions feel incredibly relevant even today.
I completely agree. We see how religious beliefs are often used to justify discrimination, conflict, and violence all over the world. Feuerbach's critique encourages us to look beyond the surface, to question those systems of power that often hide behind claims of divine authority.
And his later work on ethics is also really fascinating. It's like he was trying to develop this alternative, grounded account of morality, one that wasn't based on divine commandments or, abstract philosophical principles.
That's right. He wanted to find the roots of morality in our human nature and our capacity for empathy and compassion.
He even argued that our conscience, that inner voice that tells us right from wrong, is actually the voice of the sensuous thou. It's the recognition of the other person whose well-being is intertwined with our own.
It's a powerful idea. Morality isn't about following some external set of rules, but about recognizing our interconnectedness with others and acting in ways that promote their well-being as well as our own.
This idea seems very relevant to contemporary ethical discussions, with their emphasis on concepts like care ethics and relational economy. It's about understanding that we're not isolated individuals, but social creatures whose well-being depends on each other.
Exactly, and that recognition for Feuerbach is the foundation of a truly human morality. It's about moving away from abstract principles and grounding our ethical choices in our lived experiences, our relationships, and our shared vulnerability.
It strikes me that Feuerbach wasn't just a philosopher in some ivory tower. He was grappling with fundamental questions about what it means to be human, to live a good life, and, what role, if any, religion should play in that life.
And those are questions that are just as relevant today, perhaps even more so than in Feuerbach's time. We're living in a world where religious beliefs are often at the heart of conflict and division. At the same time, we're facing global challenges like climate change and economic inequality that require us to cooperate as a species if we're going to survive.
It makes his call for a return to nature feel so timely, doesn't it? He wanted a philosophy grounded in our shared human experience and our interconnectedness with the natural world.
It does, and it's a call that resonates deeply in a world facing so many ecological and social crises. We need to rediscover that shared sense of humanity, that recognition of our interdependence if we're going to navigate the challenges ahead.
He was offering a different way of thinking about ourselves and our place in the world, one that's both grounded and hopeful.
And he wasn't afraid to ask those tough questions, the ones that challenge our comfortable assumptions. What if our concept of God is really just a projection of our deepest longings? And what if we could find a way to fulfill those longings in a world without relying on that traditional concept of God?
Those are big questions.
They are.
But I think Feuerbach would argue that they're the questions we need to be asking if we want to create a more just compassionate and sustainable world.
He was challenging us to be honest with ourselves about what truly matters, about what it means to live a good life, and about the kind of world we want to create for ourselves and future generations.
This deep dive is really making me reevaluate my own beliefs about religion, morality, and even what it means to be free.
That's the power of engaging with a thinker like Feuerbach. His ideas may have been developed in the 19th century, but they still have this uncanny ability to make us rethink our place in the world and our responsibility to each other.
And we're not done yet. There's still so much to unpack, especially his radical idea of naturalizing freedom. It sounds almost paradoxical, doesn't it? How can freedom be natural when we're surrounded by limitations?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of Feuerbach's challenge to traditional ways of thinking. We'll explore that intriguing concept in more detail when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Ludwig Feuerbach. We've been unpacking his ideas about religion, human nature, and even morality.
Yeah.
But I'm really intrigued by this concept we touched on earlier, naturalizing freedom. It sounds almost contradictory, doesn't it?
It definitely challenges traditional philosophical ideas about freedom. We often think of freedom as this ability to transcend the limits of the natural world, to act independently of those constraints.
Right, like we're somehow separate from nature, able to make choices purely through willpower.
But Feuerbach flips that whole idea on its head. He argues that freedom isn't about denying our natural limitations, but about understanding and working within them to achieve our goals.
Okay, so instead of seeing nature as an obstacle to freedom, he sees it as the very foundation of freedom. But how does that work? We're finite beings subject to physical, social, even psychological limitations. Doesn't that make true freedom impossible?
That's where things get interesting for her. Feuerbach freedom isn't about some absolute state of limitless possibility. It's about recognizing those constraints we face and finding ways to overcome them to expand what's possible within those limitations.
So it's a more grounded, more realistic view of freedom.
Yep.
It's not about pretending we can do anything we set our minds to, but about working with what we have to create a better life for ourselves and others.
Exactly. And remember how Feuerbach emphasized the importance of the body and the senses? Well, this is where that emphasis becomes crucial for understanding his idea of freedom. For him, freedom isn't just some abstract mental state. It's about our ability to act in the world.
So it's about having the capacity to change our material conditions, to shape the world around us, to create a society that supports human flourishing.
Precisely, and this brings us back to his concept of the Glückseligkeitsdrive, that drive to happiness we discussed earlier. He saw freedom as the ability to fulfill that drive to satisfy those essential human needs and desires within the context of our natural limitations.
So it's not just about having abstract rights or freedoms, it's about having the actual means and opportunities to live a fulfilling life, to pursue those things that give us joy and meaning.
It's a very practical, this worldly understanding of freedom, and it has some pretty profound implications for how we think about politics, ethics, and even our relationship with the natural world.
It sounds like Feuerbach wasn't just calling for a philosophical shift in how we think about freedom, but for a change in the way we live our lives, the way we organize our society.
Absolutely. He was a radical thinker. In many ways, he envisioned a world where everyone has the opportunity to fulfill their Glückseligkeitsträume, a world where we can all live in accordance with our human nature, free from, those constraints of poverty, oppression, and alienation.
That's a powerful vision, but it also seems incredibly challenging to achieve. How do we overcome those deeply ingrained social structures and power dynamics that limit people's freedom and opportunities?
That's the million-dollar question, and I don't think Feuerbach pretended to have all the answers. But he was trying to point us in a new direction, to challenge us to think differently about what freedom means and how we can create a society that supports it.
I think it's fair to say that Feuerbach's vision of a naturalized freedom raises more questions than it answers. But isn't that what great philosophy does? It makes us rethink our assumptions and grapple with those big, complex issues that shape our lives.
You're absolutely right. He wasn't trying to give us a step-by-step blueprint for a utopian society. He was trying to spark our imagination, to get us thinking critically about what a truly free and just society could look like.
So where does this leave us? What should we take away from all of this? What is Feuerbach's lasting legacy, especially for those of us grappling with the complexities of the 21st century?
I think Feuerbach offers us both a challenge and a tremendous opportunity. He urges us to let go of those outdated beliefs and practices that trap us in cycles of alienation and unhappiness. He invites us to embrace our human nature, to recognize our interconnectedness with each other and with the natural world, and to work together to create a society where everyone can flourish.
It's a call to reclaim our own humanity, to find freedom, not through some kind of heroic transcendence of our limits, but through understanding and working within those limits, through recognizing our shared vulnerability and our dependence on each other and the planet.
And that message feels more urgent than ever in a world facing so many social and ecological crises. Feuerbach reminds us that we're not isolated individuals striving for some abstract ideal of freedom, but interconnected beings sharing a common fate.
This deep dive into Feuerbach's work has been incredibly thought-provoking, and I have to say I'm walking away for a renewed sense of hope, but also a sense of responsibility. It's like he's reminding us that we have the power to create a better world.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a radical shift in how we think about ourselves, our relationships, and our place in the natural order.
He challenges us to imagine a world where freedom isn't just an abstract ideal, but a lived reality grounded in our shared humanity and our interconnectedness with the world around us. That's a vision worth striving for, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the ideas of Ludwig Feuerbach, a philosopher who might not be as well known as some of his contemporaries, but whose insights into human nature, religion, and freedom still resonate powerfully today. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better world.